I personally think that there's an opportunity for CEOs to model a little bit of vulnerability here, because CEOs need to be open as well about their own AI learning journey. The example that I gave is happening in organizations, and it's not only that, you've got a lot of shadowing, you've got a lot of unknown compliance breaches because of limitation around everything that we've talked about. CEOs now have the chance to admit that they don't have all of the answers regarding the technology. So for decades now, the CEO's role was anchored in strategy, people, and the bottom line. Then came the internet, then the cloud. Each reshaped how leaders worked, but artificial intelligence is different. And I can certainly say this as a practitioner. AI, it's not just another technological shift. We've seen the plethora of conversations that happened about the impact of AI and where we stand as a global citizenship in the introduction and fast forward moving of AI in society. It's rewriting the CEO's job, and it's also rewriting the CEO's role description. In a recent Fast Company article that Faisal wrote, he argues that today's leaders must go beyond being tech literate, and they have to become philosophically literate, responsible not only for performance but for the values, assumptions and biases that are embedded in the algorithms they deploy. CEOs are now accountable for where AI operates, where it doesn't, and how its decisions align with the organization's mission, culture, and long-term strategy. So in this session, we're going to explore what it really means to lead in the age of AI, from managing the ethical, the epistemic, and strategic misalignment to modeling an AI-first culture. And this is a concept that a lot of organizations are grappling with at the moment. It's a buzzword, AI-first culture. But what does it actually mean, and how can the CEO model it? We also want to navigate the paradox of human intuition alongside machine intelligence. Our last conversation was about human-centered design and making sure that humans stay at the forefront of this revolution. So the question is no longer whether AI belongs in the enterprise, but whether leaders, CEOs, are ready for the new leadership manual it demands. Now, before we dive in, Faisal, I want to come to you, our listeners, and I want to encourage you to subscribe. Don't forget, because Convergence is on a journey and I want you to be part of this journey. It's just the beginning and it's only going to get better, but to get better and also bigger, we need your support, and we really want you to be part of this journey. So we're going to talk about the CEO job description.
Being a CEO is very difficult, probably more than ever. But there's also opportunity.
Why do you think it's more difficult now than it was before?
I mean, you mentioned the internet, you mentioned cloud, mobility, et cetera, et cetera. In all those technological revolution, what has happened, that we automated something and ultimately human being made the decision to do something with the output those things were giving us. AI is different for very reason that it's doing more than that. It's actually capable of making the decision, doing the work, and not just assist us. It goes beyond that, right? And we already acknowledge the fact that next generation workforce is human plus digital, or human plus AI, whatever you want to call it. And we're going to have to manage a set of synthetic being that may even someday much more smarter than we are.
Also been recent reports, I believe it was McKinsey, but I'm not going to quote that it was McKinsey. They have spoken about the fact that the decision maker, the main decision maker when it comes to the choice of either build versus buy or the strategical AI roadmap for an organization, has very much become the job of the CEO. Before, it used to be possibly, I mean, there was alignment with outsourcing to IT specialists, there was introduction of chief AI scientists, but now it has landed with the CEO. And one of the core criticisms is that a lot of CEOs are still very much in the mentality of mistaking AI solely as a productivity tool, rather than, as you've highlighted, something that is a decision-making partner.
Because it learns, it adapts, it makes decision, It operates at scale. It reflects the embedded value that you're trying to do or trying to define as an organization. That's why we're talking about agentic enterprise, right? So why does that make a difference for a CEO? Well, because CEO is the one who's setting up what is that embedded value, what things needs to be operated, what things needs to be learned, what things needs to be adopted, and what core cultural element that we want to establish within the enterprise. So it's not just about technology, it's about managing the technology as part of your workforce and also how you want to see your enterprise in the next 12, 18, 24, 36, even 5 years from now. So that's why it makes it so different.
Of course. But if we go back to the core point in the introduction as well, I mean, one of your arguments, which we'll get into in 2 seconds, is the philosophically literate component of the requirement that you see for a CEO to have in the developing age. We've also got the component of tech literacy. And, I have to question, why are there still CEOs that look at it primarily as a productivity gain? Because when you look at it just as a productivity gain or a tool for, enhancing productivity, you have a huge blind sight for things that are associated with governance, validation, and accountability mechanisms. Because it is a decision-making tool that is shaping decisions, and these have the consequences of governance, validation, and accountability mechanisms that have to be introduced into the organization. So I think that what we do need to make sure is that CEOs change their perspective and really understand that it is a decision-making partner, and with that come consequences. Now, you've got that element of tech literacy. Why do they then need to become philosophically literate? And what does it mean?
Actually, everything you just said is philosophy, right? Because you're saying the governance model, the culture, the strategy, incentive that drives the organizational resources, the power dynamics, right? Who does what. All that is very much part of philosophy and psychology. If you don't understand that, and if you don't understand that you're actually introducing an element that's very foreign, if I can use that term, then you're not really thinking it through. Because, what used to happen is, well, I got systems, so I will give it to my CIO because it manages information. And I've got infrastructure, meaning the networks, so I'll give it to my CTO, right? But the output of that is something I understand. Now you're saying I'm going to give that the creation, delegation, and even like the balancing of the work on systems. So that's not no longer an isolated system of information, very much part of your DNA of the organization.
Yeah. So now I see it, but I'm also questioning, because in practical terms, then the philosophical literacy that you're highlighting, it means that they have the ability to interrogate a lot of the assumptions that are embedded in the AI systems.
Yes.
But what does that look like? If I'm a board member, I'm going to my board meeting on a Monday morning, then how can I understand the harms and also recognize maybe invisible harms that even the CTO or other board of director members don't understand?
We were talking about playing chess. It's like playing chess in the sense that it's not just understanding what a system can and cannot do. It's understanding actually project or initiative risk, but also what's the enterprise risk, right? So when you introduce the notion of enterprise and project risk from governance, from outside element, how it's going to impact the people that works for you, how the work is going to get distributed, who's going to distribute that work. If you start thinking about it, and if you can start asking those questions, you don't need to know how the AI system works. You don't need to know how a large language model is being built and how that turns into a machine language. You don't need to know that how can I create a small language model from a large scale model, but you have to ask those core questions. Value of the organization. What value are you trying to create? It may be perfectly fine where you say, look, our goal is that we're going to be the biggest company with the cheapest product that's out there with the least amount of cost possible. That could be your value. I'm not saying that's a wrong value.
Yeah.
But if that's your value, you're going to operate in a different way versus I'm going to build a very specialized, high quality product with an only small amount of customer. That's a different kind of value. How you govern, how you build, how you utilize becomes a different operating.
This is a really practical example because a lot of that goes into so many different tangents of conversation. You've got the component of like managing the algorithm in the AI system, but then you've got the component of like bias trap, where you know that if it's a lot of historical biases that have been put into the system, it's also used for executive decision making, not only at the board level, but internally. There's been questions around responsibility and also governance. So there's a known example of a company who had ingested a certain set of documents into its system. And through simple prompts, they've been able to find out information about employees that they shouldn't have been able to find out about.
Sure.
Now, we go into the whole bloody zone of, if we're saying that the CEO is responsible, they have to be tech literate, they have to be philosophically literate, they have to understand the governance elements and the responsibility requirements, then you have examples like that happening all the time at the moment in organizations.
Yeah.
So how is it possible, and does it relate to, in your opinion, the statement they made at the start that the CEO job's even more difficult? Is it because there's this unknown element?
Yeah, because you don't know the power of the technology. But if you say, look, if my philosophy was like I value my customer information, I value my employee information, like if, let's say health information of your employee is sacred. You cannot have access to that. But you loaded up a quote unquote,
Some random document.
you run your model against a bunch of distributed data, and one happens to be the health information of the employee, and now everybody has access to that. That's actually ethical and philosophical question. If you were a CEO who has begun to learn the power of the technology, that CEO should be, quote unquote, be educating and establishing the mindset, what is sacred and what is not sacred in terms of information and decision, right? So look, you have worked for a bunch of CEOs. Do you think that CEOs are ready for this? And if they're not, why do you think they're not ready?
Yes, I think this is a good question. I actually was thinking about the interplay of that component. I personally think that there's an opportunity for CEOs to model a little bit of vulnerability here, because CEOs need to be open as well about their own AI learning journey. The example that I gave is happening in organizations, and it's not only that, you've got a lot of shadowing, you've got a lot of unknown compliance breaches because of limitation around everything that we've talked about. And I think that CEOs now have the chance to admit that they don't have all of the answers regarding the technology. And they have to dedicate a lot of time and invest in their own skill development that is intertwined in being vulnerable in this age as well.
Yeah, it's really the impact of technology as much as the actual technology, right? So, and that requires deep thinking, And most of the CEOs that I know, they are running from meetings to meetings and taking phone calls and not really dedicating any time for self-learning. This is a common knowledge that when you look at a lot of different type of leaders, there are some leaders who purposefully allocate 2-3 hours a day to learn and be curious about other things.
Yeah, and it's also an element of boundaries. It's being able to set your own boundaries to make sure that you do further develop and have this element of professional development and self-reflection. Boundaries as well was my other question. As you'd mentioned, an organization has a value, has a purpose, and this should be the directive as well when they're establishing and hopefully taking over market share with this alliance with this. But the boundaries also need to be set in AI, and I think that CEOs have an opportunity to say, AI can be implemented here, but this is humans only.
Right.
This is a humans only zone where this department should only work on a human basis at the moment.
Yeah, look, I mean, it has become a fundamental human question, not just CEO. How much is too much? How much automation do we really need? Just because we can doesn't mean we should. Because if we keep doing that, that's when we start losing this, the ethical, moral, and even economical, forward path. Because if we automate everything and then we have no employees, we'll have no customers. That's the basic economic fact, right? And that's where we start talking about universal base income, et cetera, et cetera. In a capital system, the businesses are really the backbone of what happens to overall economy. So every CEO, they want to dwindle the employee pool by 10% or 5%. You're not going to have anybody to buy your product.
If there's a CEO ignores this shift, and a lot of CEOs are still treating AI as an IT project, that it's, POC, a little bit of testing, it's a conventional IT product. And they're underestimating in the things that are important that we always highlight: governance, workforce adaptation, strategic integration. Like, all of these are so important. What do you think an organization that has a CEO like that will look like?
I mean, that CEO is not going to survive because his or her own employee pool is going to revolt, and they're going to say that we're missing out.
I think that the chessboard per se is an ideal representation and calculation that is required going forward in an AI and an agentic age.
I don't think we can think from a two-dimensional test. It's almost like 3 or 4-dimensional if you look at the drivers.
But the geopolitical situation, that's extremely important. That has an influence on a multitude of perspectives and also possibilities.
So when you navigate all these change drivers, you have to think from like a 3 or 4-dimensional.
You do. And I think 4-dimensionally because of development and the stage that we're in. Concrete examples are, again, like vendor, supplier, organization situations, the impact of the EU AI Act, the US AI Action Plan. There's a lot of things that will transpire this year as well that really will demand for 3 and 4-dimensional perspective.
So there's that aspect of it too.
It's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting to see what's going to happen in 5 years. We hope that you'll still be with us in 5 years. I'd like to thank you as well, Faisal, for this conversation.
Yes, this is a great conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.